The easiest time to win the trade deadline is about 5 minutes after it ends. Everybody loves the new guy. Every front office fixed something. Every fan base can find a prospect ranking that proves they either stole somebody or gave up absolutely nothing. Then baseball starts again. And baseball has this annoying habit of ruining a perfectly good transaction grade. The Dodgers made the biggest move of the deadline and acquired Tarek Skubal. They are 70-48. Still one of the best teams in baseball. They're also 2-8 in their last 10 and just lost another series in Arizona. Minnesota spent the deadline adding pitching. The Twins are 58-61. Texas spent last Monday trying to stay in the American League West race. The Rangers are back to exactly 500. Boston made one of the most aggressive moves of anybody and sits at 64-53 after spending most of the first half looking nothing like an October club. So I'm not doing deadline grades today. It's been 6 days. That's ridiculous. But what we can do is something better. Last Monday, 30 front offices told us what they thought they had. The contenders spent, the sellers cashed out. A few teams tried to do both. Now we get to compare those decisions with the baseball underneath them. What did they actually fix? Which teams already had something worth investing in? And which teams may have mistaken being close to a playoff spot for being close to a championship? The deadline is over. Now we get receipts. The standings don't lie. The box scores don't either. I'm Pete Dwyer, and this is the division line from the baseball nerd. 6 divisions, 30 teams, in one weekly breakdown of what the numbers actually say. First, we need to establish just how big this thing got. MLB says there were 50 trades on deadline day alone. Not during the season, on Monday. I'm not going to read every one of them to you. You have better things to do. Here are the moves that actually changed the shape of October. The one we all know, Tarek Skubal went to the Dodgers. The Dodgers sent the Tigers Zahir Hope, River Ryan, and Brady Smith. 2 top 100 prospects, plus another piece for a rental ace. A very close second was Adley Rutschman going to Boston along with Jake Rogers. Baltimore got Anthony Ainson, Kyson Witherspoon, Andy Azakar, and Carlos Narvaez, and a player to be named later. 3 of Boston's top 5 prospects were in that package. Philadelphia acquired Luis Arraez. San Diego bought 2 starters, Casey Mize from Detroit and Robbie Ray from San Francisco. The Cubs attacked their pitching problem with Kevin Gausman and Clay Holmes, then added Ryan Zefferjon to the bullpen. The Yankees added Luis Garcia Jr. and Helio Ramos. Tampa Bay got Freddie Peralta after missing on Skubal. The White Sox added Luis Castillo. The Brewers added Dustin May and Jojo Romero. Those are the deals I care about most right now because those teams weren't rearranging benches. They were making claims about October. The Skubal deal is the easiest to understand. The Dodgers were not buying a pitcher to get them into the playoffs. They were buying the guy they want holding the baseball in Game 1 once they get there. That is where paying a huge price for a rental starts making sense. Craig Breslow and the Red Sox made a different calculation. Rutschman is controlled through 2027, and they paid accordingly. And the Padres looked at a rotation with problems, looked at a hot stretch of baseball, and bought 2 starters. Chicago saw its own pitching depth getting thinner and attacked it from multiple directions. Every one of these trades answers a question. Now we find out whether the question was the right one. The Red Sox are probably my favorite example from the whole deadline. Not because I know the Rutschman trade will work. I don't. But because Boston's improvement came before the trade. When I worked on the playoff push piece last week, I split the season at May 31. Boston was 25-33 through May. Then everything changed. At the point I ran the numbers, the Red Sox were 38-18 since June 1, with a plus 82 run differential. And it wasn't just a hot offense carrying everybody. The pitching improved. The strikeout minus walk rate improved. The defense was 12 outs above average. The entire structure of the team changed. That's important because Boston didn't trade for Adley Rutschman and then declare itself a contender. Boston played like one. Then the front office spent real prospect capital because it believed what had already happened was sustainable. That's how I want a deadline buy to work. Evidence first, investment second. Boston's 64-53 now. They lost Sunday to the Athletics, which is baseball's little reminder that nobody gets to win every game simply because I wrote something nice about them. But the larger case hasn't moved very much. This is a legitimately different Red Sox team from the one that we watched in April and May. In the Cubs, they're interesting for almost the opposite reason. The Cubs were already good. 32-28 through May with a plus 19 run differential. Then they got better. From June 1st through the point when I ran the numbers, they were 35-21 with a plus 81 differential. Nothing alarming there. Then I got into the pitching. Their ERA improved slightly. Their FIP, fielding independent pitching, got worse from 4.45 to 4.83. That usually makes me nervous because run prevention and underlying pitching are moving in opposite directions. Then I looked at the defense. Plus 56 outs above average. More than double the next best team in baseball when I ran it. That's absurd. Chicago's defense is converting balls into outs at a rate nobody else is touching. It helps explain why the pitching staff can survive numbers that would make me much more nervous somewhere else. But the Cubs still went out and got Gausman, and Holmes, and Zephyr. They did not let the record convince them there was nothing to fix. That's good roster management. On Sunday, the Cubs beat Kansas City 10-2 and moved to 69-50. 1 week doesn't validate the deadline. But the diagnosis made sense before anybody played another game. Then there are the Twins. Minnesota added Tommy Nance, A.J. Minter, Dean Kramer, then Jeff Hoffman on deadline day. Hoffman wasn't free. Toronto got 2 ranked pitching prospects, another infielder, and international bonus money. The Twins are now 58-61. And this weekend gave us a useful test because the Twins went to Milwaukee. If you're building for October, there's October level competition sitting right there. Twins won on Friday. Milwaukee took Saturday. And on Sunday, the Brewers won 4-3. So where does that leave the deadline argument? Pretty much where it was. Minnesota wasn't wrong. We're only 6 days in. But the Twins still look more like a team trying to climb into contention than a contender fixing one obvious weakness. And those are very different things. They bought pitching. Now the rest of the roster has to make that investment matter. I spent enough time on the Rangers last episode. They were 55-57 after Houston swept them, and I wanted Chris Young listening to offers. Texas responded by playing better and getting itself right back into the race, which is great. And then Baltimore destroyed him on Sunday, and the Rangers finished the weekend 59-59, perfectly 500. I'm not taking back the argument. I'm not pretending 4 good games didn't happen because they were inconvenient for last week's podcasts. Texas made the question harder. Now I want to see whether the quality of baseball underneath the record improves too. That's it. We can come back to it when we have more evidence. Now I'm going to make this whole thing even messier. If wins and losses don't tell us how good a baseball team is, Pittsburgh might be the best example in the league. I built a 30-team process ranking this week on my Beehive. The point was to strip away the record and look at what teams were actually doing. Looking at total WAR, expected run prevention, underlying batted ball performance, defense, all the things that make a team win. Pittsburgh was 56-57 when I ran it. They had a losing record. They buried in the National League Central. When I came away from it, my model ranked the Pirates 8th in baseball, not 8th in the National League. Then I averaged WAR by division. Now we had context. Pittsburgh has Milwaukee and Chicago in its division, two teams that landed near the very top of the same rankings. Houston is in the AL West. The White Sox get the AL Central. The neighborhoods are not equal. I do want to correct something that I wrote in that Beehive piece. I had said that division games were close to half the schedule. Yeah, it used to be that way. They're not. It's 52 games, about a third. But it's still enough to matter quite a bit. The Pirates are now 58-62 after getting smoked by the Mets on Sunday, 11-1. It was ugly. But it also doesn't erase what the season-long process says. This is why I don't want a general manager making a deadline decision from the game's back column alone. The standings tell you what happened, but they don't always tell you what kind of team produced it. Now let's get into the ridiculous pitching number of the week. Belongs to nobody other than Jacob Misiorowski. On my Substack, I wrote about the August contact suppression rate leaderboard this week. Jacob Misiorowski's contact suppression rate is plus 2.830. That's the highest single season number the metric has ever measured. Not the best this season, the best in historical data. Goes back to when StatCast began. The previous full season high was Chris Sale's 2024 Cy Young season at plus 2.126. That's not a small difference. CSR, contact suppression rate, is trying to isolate the repeatable pitching skills. Miss bats without walking everybody, keep hitters off the barrel, that kind of thing. Then it puts the run prevention back into context. 0 is league average. Almost nobody gets above plus 2. But Jacob Misiorowski is approaching plus 3. His command component by itself was more than 3 standard deviations above the league when I ran the board. Then you add elite barrel suppression. There isn't an obvious weak piece holding the number up artificially. Milwaukee is 74-44. That's why I keep coming back to the Brewers when we talk about October baseball. They didn't need some deadline makeover to prove they belonged. The deadline was for reinforcement. That's what the deadline is for, and it's a much better position to operate from. Now, let's take that methodology and go the other direction with it. At the deadline, San Diego bought Robbie Ray. When I wrote about it, Ray's ERA was 3.25. His expected number was 4.54. That's a big gap. He's joining Michael King, whose ERA was 3.45, against a 4.56 expected mark. 2 of the 5 widest ERA versus expected gaps I found were sitting in the same Padres rotation after the deadline. That doesn't mean that Ray is about to explode, but it means that San Diego paid for a pitcher whose underlying performance is giving me a very different answer than his ERA. The Padres move that I like is the Casey Mize move. I trust it more. Their deadline results are going to be interesting. They did what contenders are supposed to do in that they found roster problems and they spent to address it. But now we get to find out whether they bought the right solutions. I did another study this weekend because of another phrase we hear constantly once August arrives. Built for October. Watch weekend baseball on national channels and you'll hear this team is built for October. These guys are built for October. They have October pedigree. Usually it means a team can win a 2-1 game and somebody decides that proves character. So I tried to measure it. I ranked all 30 teams in 2 situations. Winning percentage when they score 3 runs or fewer, and winning percentage in 1-run games. 5 teams appeared in the top 10 of both: the Tampa Bay Rays, the Philadelphia Phillies, the St. Louis Cardinals, Chicago White Sox, and of course, the Los Angeles Dodgers. Sounds like a pretty decent October list. Then I compared how those teams perform in those situations against how they normally perform. And that's where it got interesting. The Dodgers are 11-36 when held to 3 runs or fewer. If you keep the Dodgers offense at 3 runs or less, Los Angeles loses roughly 77% of the time. That's a massive decline from what the Dodgers normally are. Are they really some elite, grinded out team? I don't think they are. They show up on those leaderboards partly because of volume. They win a lot of everything. More interesting was Tampa Bay. The Rays were first in baseball in pitching clutch at 4.7 when I ran the study. They were first in pitching WPA at 12.3. Their batting clutch was 23rd. Their close game success had a pretty clear source, and it was on the mound. The Chicago White Sox were almost the opposite. Measuring clutch when it came to batting, the White Sox were first. Measuring clutch performance when it came to pitching, 22nd. Same type of wins, completely different mechanism. Then I tested the baseball explanation everybody reaches for. And I reached for it too. Runner in scoring position, less than 2 outs. Who cashes them in? Across the league, it barely explained the entire leaderboard. I was left scratching my head. The correlation with winning low-scoring games and runners in scoring position in was basically zero. The broader clutch and WPA numbers mattered much more, which I love, honestly, because it tells us the important moments aren't always the obvious ones. A game can turn on a 1-1 pitch in the 4th inning just as easily as a sacrifice fly everybody remembers in the 8th. That article is live on Beehive. Check it out. It's actually some pretty fascinating reading. One fantasy note, Luis Garcia Jr. is now a Yankee. Before New York traded 4 pitchers to Washington for him, the fantasy database that I run had Garcia ranked 17th among hitters. His market ranking was 134th. He had a plus 117 value gap. The data had been pointing at him for weeks as one of the guys that you really wanted to pay attention to, which is what the model is supposed to do. Not explaining why everybody should have picked up somebody after a breakout. The point of the model is to find the profile before the conversation catches up. If you want the whole fantasy board, it's on thebaseballnerd.com. But I'm not turning this into a fantasy podcast. So we're going to do a quick standings reset, and then we're going to get out of here. Tampa Bay is 71-46, still in control of the American League East. The Yankees are 66-52. Boston is 64-53. That division suddenly has 3 teams that I would be very comfortable seeing in October, and I expect to see at least 2 playing deep into October. The AL Central is much messier. Chicago is 50. Correction, we record in 3, 2, 1. Chicago is 60-56. Cleveland and Detroit are both 58-60. Minnesota is 58-61. There's 3.5 games between 4 teams. The AL West is just, is weird. Texas finished Sunday 59-59. Houston is playing tonight as we record this in San Diego. Neither one of those teams has managed to make the division feel settled. They have a chance. One of those teams has a chance to end this thing and put some space between. Maybe Houston does it tonight. The National League Central, Milwaukee's at 74-44. Chicago's at 69-50. Excellent baseball teams sharing one division. Atlanta has control of the National League East at 71-47. The Phillies are 63-56, and it increasingly looks like they're fighting for a wild card position rather than the division. And of course, Los Angeles still leads the West at 70-48, despite a recent really bad skid. With Arizona at 63-56 And San Diego coming into Sunday night at 61-57. San Diego plays Houston. There's a couple series that you're going to want to watch this week. The first one, Cleveland at Detroit, starting on Tuesday. Both teams are 58-60. Cleveland added at the deadline. Detroit traded Tarek Skubal and Casey Mize. It was two front offices that took radically different readings of where they were. Now they play 3 games with the same record. I don't need to sell that one any harder. Second, Milwaukee's at San Diego starting on Monday. The best record in baseball against one of the most aggressive deadline buyers. San Diego bought because the rotation needed help. Milwaukee has Misiorowski and a team that has barely wobbled all year. If we want to see evidence that the Padres moved themselves towards October, this is going to be a good test. The third one you don't want to miss is Philadelphia at St. Louis. The Phillies are trying to hold wild card position with a completely reshuffled defense after acquiring Arise. St. Louis is sitting at 500 and still close enough to matter. I want to see the Philadelphia experiment against games that actually carry standings pressure. And Thursday, separately, Minnesota and Philadelphia get the Field of Dreams game in Iowa. That one is worth watching even before we get to the playoff implications. That's the first week after the deadline, and I think we're already learning something. The best deadline moves make sense before we know whether they work. Boston's underlying team improved, so the Red Sox spent. Chicago found a weakness the standings were hiding, so the Cubs attacked it. Milwaukee had one of the best teams in baseball and added around the edges. San Diego identified the rotation and went after 2 starters. The Twins made a bet that the roster was close enough to justify reinforcing. Those bets don't get graded in 6 days. They get graded in October. For some of these teams, there's a question if October happens at all. And that's what makes the next 7 weeks better than the deadline itself. The rumors are gone. Every roster is locked. Nobody gets to fix the mistake with another phone call. Now the theories have to survive baseball. If you want the deeper work from this week, the full Misiorowski and contact suppression rating leaderboard, the fantasy score database, and the playoff push study, and my deep dive into the baseball CBA, are all available on the Baseball Nerd on Substack. The main site is thebaseballnerd.com. Substack is thebaseballnerd.substack.com. And Beehive is thebaseballnerd.beehive.com. New episodes of The Division Line drop every Monday morning. Please like, follow, and share the show. I'm Pete Dwyer, and I'll see you on Monday.